Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sermon Notes, a chance for Matt, Jared, and myself to go a little bit deeper into the sermon that we just got off of, but this is a little bit different. You know, we took a couple weeks off in the summer, had some planning going on, had some trips going on, and now we get a chance to come back for the new sermon series on apologetics, the defense of the faith. Something that I know both Matt and Jared are very excited about, something they're very passionate about. But wanted to recap just a little bit of the summer. You know, we just got out of a sermon series on scandalous love, the sermon series that you did on Jonah, and an interesting one. One that I think at times would hit home for people, one that I heard a ton of great things about, and one that you even moved side to side on. You got a little bit away from the pulpit from time to time. I was proud of you for that. But do you want to kind of give us just a quick recap of what we did, since we're talking about a four-week sermon?
Yeah, you know, a lot of the prophets, in fact, all of them except for Jonah, it's an oracle, you know, that they're speaking the word of God. It's a message from the prophet to the people. But with Jonah, the prophetic side of it is that it's a story about Jonah. And I really do think that the author designs it in such a way to where you sympathize with Jonah. You realize that if you were a reader back then, you'd have kind of been pulling for Jonah to be the hero. And in fact, he's not the hero at all. It turns out to be, you know, God working in the hearts of the people of Nineveh. But that question at the very end where God says, "Should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle?" To me, that's just kind of a gut punch to say, hey, we need to think about the fact that God loves all people. He loves them too. Even those people that are hard to love, even those people that we may have a history with, God's desire for them is salvation. God's desire is for their redemption. And if God calls us to go and speak to them in love, we should be faithful in doing that. So, but yeah, it's a powerful little story, and a lot of times we kind of just think it's a kid's story, but it's really pretty controversial in many ways.
Yeah, pretty interesting how like you said, it's about Jonah. You know, you keep waiting for this message where we keep talking about the Ninevites, we keep hearing about the Ninevites, and he does go to the Ninevites and preaches, what is it, a 5-word sermon, you said?
Yeah.
But yeah, everything in there is continuing to either respond to or obey God. I mean, the fish obeys God in swallowing Jonah and then spitting him back up. The sailors respond to the message that Jonah brings them and then respond to God. And then the Ninevites respond to the message that is brought to them. Jonah's really the only one that we see that continues to struggle and to push against this.
Right.
And in a book that I think we would expect it to be about them, it's more about us and our hearts.
Yeah, it's an open-ended book, you know, ending with that question. And, you know, it's interesting, I was listening to a podcast on this, and the guy said he's got like 4 children's books on Jonah, and he said, and 2 of them don't even have the 4th chapter. The 4th chapter kind of brings everything together in a sense, because he states who God is. He's a gracious God, merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. For me, that's kind of the key passage in the entire story. But we have a tendency, we don't really like that chapter because it doesn't end with a happy ending. It ends with a challenge to all of us to consider, hey, shouldn't God have pity on them too? And not just us, not just our folks, but people whom we may have a difficult time with. God loves them too. So it's a story of God's scandalous love for sure.
Matt, you got anything?
So why did you choose the title Scandalous?
Scandalous, because one of the definitions of scandalous is something that's outrageous. And so, yeah, it certainly has, there's one aspect of it that could be negative. We think of a scandal, we think of something a lot of times immoral that's going on. But theologians such as D.A. Carson will talk about, you know, the scandalous cross and things like that. And it just goes to show the outrageous side of God's love. And as I said in the sermon series, I think that one of the most offensive things about God to us is his love. Because we have a tendency, we want to just kind of shun people and things of that nature. But I really do believe that, you know, the Bible teaches God is love. Jonah is a story of demonstrating God's steadfast love for them too. Jesus' death on the cross, it says God proves his love for us even while we were yet sinners. And but yeah, that's kind of where the word scandalous came from. I mean it in terms of it being outrageous.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
And I mean, I think it ties in really well with this series anyways. I mean, that's actually what's most offensive about God is his love. That was kind of one of the things I wrote down in my notes. And he loves people that we hate, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, because that's one of the biggest struggles a lot of atheists have with Christianity is, well, why should God forgive someone that on their deathbed?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and we're like, well, yeah, if Hitler repented and became a Christian right before his death,
yeah.
Would he be in heaven? Would he be
Yeah.
with God? And so a lot of atheists will use that as
Sure.
as an argument against Christianity. And I think it's fascinating that it's his love is so offensive in that regard.
Absolutely. And sometimes even him loving us, the Bible talks about discipline. I think it's Hebrews 8 or somewhere around in there. God disciplines those he loves. And I think we're all parents. And so we understand sometimes loving our kid is very offensive to them because we say, you can't have this. This is not good for you. And we take them to the dentist. We say, hey, no more candy. We do stuff out of love for them that ticks them off, and that upsets them.
Yeah.
But it's still loving. It would be unloving if we kind of pulled back and didn't do that because we knew it was going to upset them. And so sometimes God's love for us is even very offensive.
Wait. You mean to tell me that my chief goal as a parent is not solely to make my children happy and give them whatever they want?
That's what I'm telling you.
I guess it's time to give them a toothbrush and take away the candy then.
Yeah, there you go.
And it's interesting that I really enjoyed, we talk about the offensive love of God. I also enjoyed, there's a constant pursuit of Jonah in this story as well.
Yeah.
God is continuing. God doesn't just cast him off and say, if you're going to go fine, I'll leave you alone. Like, there's a constant pursuit, and throughout the whole book, it's uncomfortable for Jonah. It really is.
Yeah.
But I think that can also be something that is a comfort to us, that God does continue to pursue us, even in our disobedience, even in our fright, in our fear. God continues to pursue us and continues to call us. That's something that when I read the book of Jonah, it just, all of the different aspects of this, of loving them, but also of loving me, even in my running and my cowardice is incredible.
Yeah, and you pray that, because it's open-ended, you pray that Jonah reflected on that verse 11 and came around and said, yeah, God, you should. Even though they are our bitter enemies and some of the historical things that happen are appalling to us. It's Nazi-type stuff, what some of these Ninevites did to people. And for God to send his prophet to preach his word and for them to repent so that he could redeem them would have been very offensive. But yeah, God pursues Jonah throughout this entire thing too, and you just pray that after it was all said and done, that Jonah repented himself and trusted in God and rejoiced in God's grace for him as well.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I thought it was great. You did your best to lightly share the animosity between them, but the Assyrians were. They're infamous for their treatment when they would go and do battle. I mean, just horrendous things and things that even trying to comprehend them, you see pictures and drawings and you just go, oh my gosh, how, and thinking that is the group. And so I really appreciated that with you doing your best to let them know that, because you also brought up a few things about who we may view as our enemies or who we hate. And when you look at that and you think about the treatment that the Israelites and so many people had at the hands of the Assyrians, and then you think about why we tend to hate people, it almost puts ours to shame at times. I mean, you kept mentioning Trump, Hillary, and Obama in that very first one, and you could feel the tension in the room a little bit every time you said it. But looking at why we feel like we may hate someone who supports them or hate them. And then thinking about what God was calling Jonah to do with the Ninevites really kind of puts our own emotions under a magnifying glass, I think.
Yeah, I think today, as much as we could compare or relate to this story, would be political parties or the terrorists that we fight as a nation. I think those would be comparable. And it was, we talked about this a little bit, the first message, but at the Southern Baptist Convention, we did have the vice president come in and speak, and You know, he spoke as a government official. He's got the terrorist on the run, and that's the proper role of government, is to protect people, to fight evil and injustice. But the proper role, the proper role for the church is something that was said the night before when the president of the International Mission Board said, we're seeing terrorists come to Christ. And that's what we ought to be excited about. That's what we ought to cheer about. That's what we ought to love, is seeing people who were once hostile to God come to know God. Because Saul himself was hostile to the Christian faith. He was zealous to squelch Christianity. But he had that Damascus Road experience, and he was confronted by God and saved. And then we see all that God did through him in such a powerful way. And I think that's a testimony for all of us. So
I think it is. Matt, did you want to drop in with anything there? Or?
No, I mean, just one of the things that you said, the Lord is God of all, not just our tribe.
Right.
And, you know, we have, as human beings, we have a tendency to tribalism. And so, especially in politics, I mean, that's kind of the goal of every politician, is to tribalize people and get them having disunity, whatever. And so I think you really hit the nail on the head with that, and I thought it was good.
Yeah, and you know, some people, and I'm sure we're about to transition here in a minute into apologia, but some people have a real problem with Christianity because of what they might see as tribalism, that, you know, these are the only people. But God, is very important to understand that in the Old Testament, Genesis 12, God chose Abraham to be a blessing to all the families of the earth, and to carry that grace and that mercy to all people. And so, yes, there is the exclusive side of it. We are saved. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through him. But this is a message for the world. God loves the world and sent his Son to die for the sins of those who would trust in him. So I think that's a very important point, for sure.
Well, and it is, and it's a great transition point now into apologia, where we begin to talk about the defense of the faith, and maybe even more so. You really brought this out this past Sunday in understanding what you believe and why you believe it, because when that becomes questioned, you're going to have an answer for it.
Right.
That as we begin to take that, and as we begin to go and try to take that to the nations, that you're not always going to run into people that go, oh, you preached a 5-word sermon and it's fantastic.
Right,
Let's roll with it. You know, you're going to get a lot of pushback, and so I think it's important. Do you want to speak quickly just as to why it is that you chose to do apologia? What is it about this sermon series that kind of drew you to it?
I think on multiple levels. For me, I see that it is what we talked about yesterday. We are given the admonition in the Bible to defend the faith. I think it's a very important concept that we find in the New Testament, is that they were not just proclaiming the gospel, they were proclaiming it, and then they were backing up what they said in various ways. And so I think that it's part of the Christian faith not only to believe the content of the gospel, but to be like Paul, recognizing that we're put here for the defense of the gospel. And I know for me personally, in terms of just my growth my growth as a Christian, there have been few things more fruitful than really getting into researching the why of what I believe. Why do I believe it? What reasons do I have to believe what I believe? And so I know it has an edifying effect on every person who engages in politics and engages in that practice of defending the faith, because a lot of times you're going to be talking with a skeptic, and they're going to ask questions you don't have the answer for, and you've got to be honest and say, you know, I don't know, but I'm gonna find out. You know, what I know, what I do know is enough for me to believe that Jesus is the beloved Son of God. I feel like I've experienced his spirit. I feel like there's good reason to believe that he died on the cross. God raised him from the dead. These are historical events. So whatever questions I do have would be on the periphery. It would be on the edge or on the fringe. It wouldn't be the content of the gospel itself that I'd have a hard time with. But sometimes people are going to ask questions you don't have the answer for, and then you go and you look it up, and you're stronger because of that, because of those discussions. And so that's kind of why I wanted to do Apologia, to encourage people not just to know what they believe, but to know why they believe it.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things you've mentioned a couple of times, but as I've been talking to people in the church, I've tried to make people understand that what you're doing is not just it's not a purely academic type message. This is not something where you go and you sit in a classroom and you just kind of listen to the professor drone on. That this is not someone who loves apologetics talking to people about apologetics. This is talking to people about their faith,
Right.
and because when it comes down to it, and sometimes I hope this doesn't sound too self-serving, we're 3 ministers. Most of our time is spent working with people in the church. And I know we try to emphasize this as much as possible, but when people in the church go to their jobs, when they go to their work, when they go to the store, whatever it is that they go do, they will wind up inevitably being around more lost people than we can typically put ourselves around.
Right.
Now, I know we all do our best in trying to find ways to do that, but just in their daily lives, they're going to do that. And so it is important because not everyone is going to accept the answer of, hey, let me give you my pastor's phone number so he can answer that question. At times, when you're, and there are going to be some questions, I mean, let's face it, there are going to be some questions that we just aren't always equipped to answer. But when it comes to some of those that you're covering and just some basic questions, hey, why do you believe this? It's incredibly important in our everyday lives of faith to be able to at least be able to respond to the basic questions and build from the basic and get a little bit more detailed and a little bit more detailed.
Yeah, they're responsible to be prepared, as Peter said, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. People are going to ask questions. They should ask questions. I think that's, that expresses their desire to learn and to seek out the truth. And we should be prepared to answer those questions. As congregants, they should be always prepared to answer those questions. As ministers, we should help prepare them. It's our responsibility to equip the saints for the work of ministry, and that is part of the work of ministry, is to help people defend their faith. So that's why, for me, I wanted to do this series. And it might be something that we do every August, just take a few weeks and look at reasons for why we believe what we believe, and kind of use that as an equipping format to train people to do so.
And I like how you added in, the yet do it with gentleness and respect. I think that really is key, because when you're making a defense, you're not defending the truthfulness of the Bible, because it defends itself. I mean, it's true. And it's like, what did Spurgeon say? A roaring lion, just let it loose.
Sure.
But what you're doing is you're loving someone enough to be able to offer the reasons why you believe it. And to me, it's all about how you love another person. And so the fact that I'm making a defense of this, it's about hope. Why do I have hope? This is why I have hope.
Right.
Because this is true. And this, I'm not defending myself. I'm not trying to fight for my own cause. I'm fighting for the fact that for them. I mean, so in essence, apologetics is loving another person enough to explain to them why you have the hope that you do. And so for me, I just think it's just another form of loving another person.
Sure.
And loving them with gentleness and respect. Because like you said, we're not trying to win a battle and lose the war. We're loving on them. And that's why I think Peter's really getting to is sharing it with gentleness and respect.
Yeah, and as Francis Schaeffer draws out, love is the ultimate apologetic. If you love someone, you're going to patiently listen to those questions, and you're going to deal with the challenges to the faith. There are challenges to our faith. There are things that are hard to explain and understand in the Bible, and so we should honestly listen to those concerns and deal with it in love. But being prepared, the defense that we give will only have weight or gravitas based upon how much it aligns with the life that we live. If we're, just kind of living a shallow life, then our defense is probably going to be pretty shallow as well. But if we're one who is striving after holiness and pursuing righteousness and loving Jesus and serving Him in a powerful, Spirit-filled way, people are going to want to know about the hope that is within us. And then we can share that with them, and it just carries more weight when you're loving and pursuing righteousness.
You mentioned a lot about us being ambassadors, and I had a couple of things I wanted to discuss about that. Growing up, I grew up in West Africa, and so we're like the only Americans in a little area and stuff like that. And so, we were consciously, aware of the fact that we're not of this tribe. And part of it, when we went to France, we were always told the French are rude, right? The French just are rude people. They don't like, Americans especially because they just think Americans are rude. And well, we got there, and these French people were like the most loving and caring people. They helped us find places. And apparently they had a big national conversation about the fact that everybody considers them rude, and they were trying to change their face and trying to be extra, extra kind and everything. And so, it was effective because I have a different view of the French people. But we as Christians, it's very, the ambassador part I wanted to kind of bring out was that we as Christians, we may make mistakes, we may be rude, but we can change our face a lot.
Absolutely.
And also, apologetics is situational. You don't have to have a degree in philosophy to discuss it with your coworker.
Absolutely.
And ambassadors, when they go to a foreign country, they study that country. They go and they go into, say, Israel. They're going to learn about the history of Israel. They're going to know about it. Well, each of us working people are placed in a situation with coworkers, and we have the same questions that those coworkers have. If you're working in a steel mill, you're not going to probably run across somebody who, spends all their time in academia and, has all these arguments. You can say, hey, this is the reason I have hope. When I get home and I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I don't beat my kids, I don't beat my family, I don't drink because I have a better hope, and this is it, and I don't take my frustrations out because my hope is in something greater.
Right.
And so they don't have to know all the answers, they don't have to know all these fancy words, they just have to be able to explain it to those they work with,
Absolutely.
And I think that's encouraging to me, if I was, say back in the Army, I wouldn't have to be able to defend all the crazy philosophical questions. I could do some basic life and death. This is why I believe. This is why I have trust. Right. And we have members from our church that do that, I think, pretty well and share their witness, in the military and as well. So, anyways, that's kind of what I was thinking about the ambassador side. And
it's a good word. And Paul's saying that again. I am here for the defense of the gospel.
Yeah.
And so, it wasn't just him walking around handing out tracts. It was him reasoning with people. It was him persuading people. There was the Bible, on the one hand, says and exhorts us to go and always be prepared to make a defense. On the other hand, we see that this is the example of Jesus. He did provide signs and wonders. Ultimately, his resurrection. The apostles, that was the way of the apostles as well. They went about persuading and reasoning in the synagogues on a regular basis, dealing with probably a much different objections than what we deal with today, because it was kind of just taken as an assumption that there was a supernatural world back then. Today, we've got a lot of naturalism that goes on. We're going to deal with some of that in the weeks ahead, but it was the way in which they went about their ministry. They constantly reasoned with people, explained to people, and ultimately we see the transformative effect on culture and things of that nature when we're giving a strong defense of the faith.
Well, and they went to their comfort zones. I mean, Peter stayed in Jerusalem area and dealt with other Jews. Paul, being a Jew with lots of knowledge, but also being raised in a Gentile area, he was able to kind of go into these places and talk intelligently with them.
Sure.
So for me to go into some place where I'm not comfortable right off the bat is probably a bad idea.
Yeah.
But I can love well the people around me, and maybe he will send me somewhere. But that is part of being on mission for Christ, and I think our congregation understands that. Even when we're tired and exhausted and we just want to go home and sit on the couch, which is kind of my preference of things to do, sometimes we need to go to where the people are.
Right.
And that's what Paul did. I mean, he went and lived as a tent maker. He worked and, these kind of things. And I think we need to encourage our congregation to do that. And one of the questions that I would have is, how do I get started? I mean, what are some basic tools that me as a layperson, I don't have to spend a ton of time studying, I don't have to spend a ton of money, I don't have to go get a philosophy degree or a theological degree. How do I get started?
Okay, so I think there's some good books out there. One is perhaps one of the most popular is Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. I would encourage anybody to go and get that. Here is someone who was a skeptic, started researching for this work to take down Christianity, and as he looked at the evidence, he realized actually it's more plausible to believe that God does exist and that Christ is who he says he is. And so that's just a good popular level book. Case for Christ. Even he has a case for faith. Mike Licona and Gary Habermas have a book called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus, which is an excellent resource. All of those are kind of good popular level books. Of course, one of my favorite theologians is William Lane Craig. If you go to reasonablefaith.org, reasonablefaith.org, they've got a ton of resources there for you. He wrote a book called On Guard, and that's been a very beneficial book for me in defending my faith. But they also have these little short 3-minute videos that illustrate certain arguments, some of which we're going to go over in the weeks to come. Like, for example, the cosmological argument: whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That cause has to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, outside of all space, time, and matter. And by the time you kind of do all the math, you realize, okay, well, that would be God. And so, yeah, go to some of those websites and read some of those books. They've got some great resources. I really like those animated videos because they kind of condense some very complex ideas into some shorter, easy to digest truths.
And I think I would add Tim Keller's.
Yes,
Tim Keller's
Reason
books,
for God. Yes,
Reason for God, because I feel like it's really accessible.
Right.
And you don't have to have some
Absolutely.
kind of crazy, degree to
Yes,
understand him. And
that's
I
a
think
great
he answers a lot of the questions that I might have had in similar situations.
Yeah, The Reason for God by Tim Keller.
Yeah,
That's
Reason
an
for
excellent
God.
resource as well.
And I'll look at finding a coloring book that, from my side of things, that we can throw in there. But
Well, you have the Apologetic Study Bible on your desk.
Yes, I do.
Have you found
That's a
that
good one.
a useful resource?
I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it because the Apologetic Study Bible does a really good job of pointing out the way that some of these stories and the way some cultures view things in the Bible, view things that we believe, and giving you that viewpoint and also how we approach those viewpoints. Because I know for me, growing up in the church, it has taken me a while to get to a point where I can actually I don't always do a great job, but view things in the Bible from the way that maybe people who don't believe would view it. Where it does, it looks a little strange. It looks a little interesting.
Right.
One of the most entertaining sermons I've heard, I know that's not always a great nominalism, but was actually one where a guy was kind of going, when you don't come from a biblical background and going through the book of Genesis. And the way the book of Genesis sounds, if you didn't grow up with the illustrated Bible and all, talking about, I'm not going to go through it because I won't do as good a job, but, that's the thing is here's this perfect garden. Oh, now here's a snake. Hey, eat this apple. Oh, hey, he made me do it. And then it moves on and on and on. Yeah. But so that's I got off on track, which, surprise, I got off.
No,
but
what about kids? I mean, because... I have an addition recently. I just had to bring that up, and she's beautiful. But
absolutely,
but raising her, and I'm constantly going back to, how do I raise teenagers and how do I raise children? And because I work with teens and I have kids. So what are some, I guess, how can we get them started off on the right foot so that we don't hit some of the pitfalls that we did? We were a little angrier or we were a little less gentle, respectful with others. How, because my dad's bigger than your dad kind of mentality as a kid. Oh, you don't believe in God? Well, you're going to hell. And that kind of mentality is going to turn off a lot of people from an early age. So what can we do with our kids, and what can we do with our teens?
Well, I think just first, them being able to ask any question they want to, that you would engage them in these conversations and, challenge them, get them to ask questions. Sometimes when I'm working in the house, I'll turn a video on of a debate between a theist and an atheist, and so it's just playing, and inevitably some of my kids will wander in there and watch for a little bit what's going on. They just need to be aware that these arguments against the Christian faith, such as, whether it be evolution or evil and suffering in the world or the hiddenness of God, things of this nature, there are good responses to those. Yeah. And those responses, as we mentioned earlier, we've had those responses for hundreds and hundreds of years, going all the way back in some cases to the time the Bible was being written. And so it's just a great effort to constantly allow them to ask questions and let me bring something else up. We're going to start at the end of August a time where I have lunch, kind of a Bible study type thing. And the first one we're going to do is a book by Greg Kuchel called Tactics. And it's going to be how to basically challenge the beliefs of others who may not be Christians. And so when you get into those conversations, how do you navigate those conversations? And a lot of times we just feel like we've always got to give answers and stuff like that, but sometimes the most effective thing to do is ask them questions, because a lot of times they haven't thought through their own beliefs. And very quickly, you can demonstrate how there's some major holes in what this person believes just simply by knowing how to ask the right questions and stuff. So hopefully people can come to that.
Fantastic. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this week's edition of Sermon Notes. We'll be back here every Monday at noon, and I would urge you that this is a great time to really make this a habit. Getting into this apologia study with both Matt and Jared is going to be absolutely fantastic. These are some of the most, and I'm only going to say this once, some of the most intelligent theological guys that I've met. They're very passionate about this, and this is going to be a great time for our sermon notes and moving forward. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email, kyle@tvbc.net. I would love to either answer it or pass it along to someone that could probably answer it a little bit better. And then please, as you continue watching, send us a message on Facebook with your question. We'd love to answer it live and kind of interact with you that way. But once again, thank you so much for joining us. We're really looking forward to this sermon series and looking forward to seeing you on Monday afternoons. Have a great afternoon.